So hello everyone. We are here today for a new series of our aviation talks on the SCP channel. I have invited my dear friend Fredrik KAMPFE to join me today. Fredrik is very experienced. He knows the inside outs of the aviation industry because he has exposure to both the public and the private sectors. He is currently the Director Industry Affairs for the Swedish Aviation Industry Group, and he served as also acting and deputy chief legal advisor for the European Aviation Safety Agency. He's an experienced pilot, and I don't know anyone who's better than Fredrik to have this conversation with today. So Fredrik, I guess that the question on everybody's lips nowadays is, when are we going to travel again? How are we going to travel again? Will we see the aviation industry in the same format that we're used to? Are we going to be able to overcome the few challenges like the public's trust or the bans that the states have imposed in their efforts to contain the pandemics? And just the other day I came across a quotation from Professor Mate, and he was saying that there's not a common understanding of the uniqueness of the aviation industry, and that this is one of the reasons the international cooperation faces so many breaks and walls, and that it's maybe time for a shift in the way we think. So about all this, we're going to tackle today. But before we start, I would like to invite you to talk a little bit about your activity. What is the Swedish Aviation Industry Group? Because I'm not really sure that our public is very knowledgeable about that. Fredrik, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Sorana. It's a great pleasure to join you in this way, also to discuss the important issues that you just mentioned. And I take great honor to have been able to join you in Bucharest a couple of times in your conferences. And I commemorate that with wearing one of the badge holders from the 2012 conference that you so beautifully organized back home at that time. A lot has happened since then. That was 2012. Now it's 8 years later. And as you just explained, I was working with the European Aviation Safety Agency for many years. From 2004 to 2018, and since 2018 I'm back in Sweden and working then as the director for aeropolitical affairs for the Swedish Aviation Industry Group, which is part of the Swedish Confederation of Transport Enterprises, which in itself is a part of the Swedish Confederation of Swedish Enterprises, which is the biggest organization in Sweden representing the private industry, basically all private industry. And if we look at the Swedish Aviation Industry Group, we have approximately 100 member companies consisting of everything from the big airlines, SAS, Braathens, smaller airlines, but also some regional airports. We have and basically everything in between there supporting the aviation industry. We also have the private aviation, let's say, the air service provider, so air traffic control provider, ACR, Aviation Capacity Resources. They're also members. And we have anything from catering companies to maintenance companies and companies that also rent out staff to the industry. So very broad. And in total, they comprise about 10,000 employees in the aviation industry sector. One word also about the Swedish Confederation of Transport Enterprises, which then is my, let's say, employer. We have almost 10,000 member companies and over 220,000 employees, which makes it a very big group in the Swedish, let's say, industry politics. This, let's say, the broad foundation, because we have all transport modes in our group, gives us also quite a lot of interesting positioning in the society, in the debate, because we can also look at not only aviation as part of the transport system, but basically all modes of transport, which we might come back to later on in this interview.
Excellent. It's very interesting how the Swedish approach is, because in Romania it's more different. We do talk about different sectors of the transport industry. Aviation deals with its own matters, maritime, road, railway. So it's very interesting to see that you do have a forum where you can share information and you can identify elements that are of common interest and maybe get inspiration one from another. That's a really interesting approach. So to get to our subject, do you think that the aviation industry is going to recover well and fast? And how will it look like in the near, also a longer future, in your opinion?
Well, my crystal ball is maybe as good as yours, but I'll give it a try. I think we should, when we have these kind of discussions, and there's a lot of speculation out there what will happen with the transport industry as such, and certainly with the aviation industry. But I think one thing is for certain: the demand for transport will not shrink, unless we end up in a situation where we have a global crisis of even bigger scale than Corona. We constantly become more on this planet, more people, and the average income and the well-being of these people, our friends and families, is constantly also increasing. And I think that this direction will continue, this development. And having said that, the need for transport will not shrink. But at the moment, we are at a situation where transport had to be paused. And of course, there are new ways explored now, like you and I. Maybe we would meet in person if it wasn't for Corona. But now we meet like this. And the number of meetings, virtual meetings out there is huge. And we see the growth of these companies like Zoom and Skype and others, and I think everyone is sitting with Microsoft Teams, for example, and discussing with colleagues and friends all over the world and doing business relations. And this development is not new. Huh? We were already seeing this pre-Corona, but probably this crisis will make us think in a different way when we meet, when do we travel, when do we have our meetings online, etc. But the essential need for human interaction will always be there. That's my belief. And but of course, it will take some time to recover. Now, how long this will be, we will have to see. We're not there yet to be able to make these predictions. We see that certain countries and regions like the EU is starting to prepare for opening up tourism and travel again. And we have to make sure, of course, that this is done in a way which does not increase the spread of the disease, but in a controlled way. But eventually we will open up our borders, and the borders will allow us to travel again. It will be a period of time. If it's half a year, 1 year, 2 or 3 years, we have to see where we will feel the constraints of the situation, I think. So it will not be like from 0 to 1 in a digital manner. It will be in steps, incremental steps. We will see domestic markets and maybe regional markets opening up quicker, probably, than the international markets. There will be city pairs, country pairs, regional pairs that will agree on certain conditions for travel and will slowly allow travel. And gradually this will come to then a situation which pretty much will resemble the situation we had before Corona. That's how I see it.
I was talking the other day to another friend of mine. She's from Colombia and she represents IFALPA. And she was telling me that Latin America is trying to coordinate in order to have more or less the same measures in place and to start the aviation industry all at the same time, because this will make it easier for them and also for the operators to adjust to the new conditions and bans that each state is adopting. And I also saw one of the declarations that the CEO of IATA was making, that we do expect a slower recovery than maybe we imagined in the first place. And also one of the challenges that we face today is the confidence of the traveling public. I hear many of my aviation colleagues saying that they are afraid of flying because the virus is easier transmitted on board aircraft. So this is something that the aviation industry has to overcome, apart from the different traveling bans. On a different note, and talking about traveling bans, how do you think that social distancing will actually work? Because we hear about social distancing at airports, we hear about social distancing on board aircraft. For example, Romania, when it comes to airports, for the Bucharest company, they've taken certain measures, like they've installed tents outside the terminal where they will perform a procedure to evaluate the state of health of the passengers. And there are even talks about the rapid tests, the fast testing that passengers could be obliged to undertake if they want to be on board. And also certain airlines discuss keeping the middle seats empty. Do you think that's feasible? Do you think that will help the industry recover, or it's going to be a higher burden for them?
Well, I think, you know, it's a very good time to talk about this, because this week and these weeks will be very important when for the industry to define its approach here. This week, IATA and ACI has presented, I just downloaded minutes before our meeting, their policy document, how they see return to travel will look like. EASA will publish its recommendations today, if I'm informed correctly. We've seen the EU Commission communicating last week how they see travel and tourism can start again. Not saying that it will start or when it will start, but if it starts, they have some recommendations there. And we also see individual airlines, as you said, that are already quite far ahead of the game, actually, presenting very much in detail how they will be able to transport persons also in this situation, but also, I suppose, then in the recovery period. When it comes to social distancing, I think we have to take also one step back. What the industry has to be able to, let's say, produce here, and the situation that we would like to see is a situation where we have evidence-based international measures that are coordinated, preferably on the global level and certainly on the European, let's say, regional level. And in regions, as you said, South America should do the same. And then the regions, the countries can meet and discuss these issues and then agree on certain measures that are necessary to mitigate the spread of the disease. Now, when it comes to social distancing on board flights, we should also start there in the, let's say, evidence-based measures. And IATA and ACI, and I think also EASA, will be quite clear that there's no evidence that disease like corona is spread more easily on board an aircraft. Maybe on the contrary, even, because we don't have to sit next to each other and let's say face to face. The modern aircraft are equipped with HEPA filters, very efficient HEPA filters, and there's also a flow of air that is not, or let's say that works in our advantage. because it takes the air away from our breath and down in the aircraft, and then it's filtered again and pushed through the nozzles that we see on top of just over our heads. So having said that, we need to make sure that the measures are evidence-based. And I think if we look at aviation, how we always have worked with aviation safety is exactly that. We should not allow too much of politics to come in here. We need to make this in a very thoughtful way, which is evidence-based, scientifically based. And if you look at the documents that are produced already, and I'm sure this will also be in the EASA's documents, but IATA, ACI document, as well as, for example, our member airline SAS, they take several different measures to let's say, to help this social distancing to really take place in the pre-boarding situation, in the boarding situation, on board the aircraft, and then also deboarding. The airports will do the same to ensure the situation is stable there. And when it comes to the actual operators, let's say the general opinion now is that social distancing is something which is favored, but it will not always be possible. And that's why also some airlines, and I think also ACI and IATA and soon enough EASA will also see that face masks is part of that, let's say, arsenal of measures that will be taken to avoid the spread of the disease. So it will not be just one single measure, like, so, you know, leaving the middle seat empty. It will be an arsenal of measures, which in totality will ensure a safe travel. And again, coming back to how aviation has always dealt with safety threats, it's that kind of method, evidence-based, scientific and careful, and certainly not political, that will, I think, regain the confidence from the flying public that aviation is continuing to be a very safe way of travel.
I totally agree with you that we should approach this pandemic as we usually approach things related to aviation safety, with risk assessment, with management measures. We do have experience, and I think it is possible. But in these situations, how do we handle the aviation infrastructure? Do we expect changes? How is it going to look like?
There you touch on a very, very important aspect of the crisis, which I think sometimes is forgotten in discussions. Now, we who work in the aviation industry in various ways, we are very much aware of how the infrastructure for aviation, be it on the ground or in the air, is managed, and certainly how it is paid for. And most of this, especially in Europe, is governed also by European legislation. So we have regulations on airport charges, and we have regulations on how to charge and to transfer money even on when it comes to overflight and the air traffic management system, how it's paid. And then we have the security fees to maintain security at the airports, so that we don't have weapons and terrorists coming in and doing damage to aviation, which is also regulated. So all these things are quite heavily regulated, which means that, or rather, and it's regulated from the perspective that it depends on passengers and cargo, but certainly passengers in the system. And right now, there are very few passengers in the system, which means that there are no revenues. So the airlines are not flying, and that means that they are not paying for using the infrastructure. Now, they're not paying to the airports, they're not paying also for overflights or for terminal navigation charges, etc., to the air traffic controls more locally. And they're also not paying for their share of security charges at airports. But interestingly, if you look at the legal documents that are governing these systems, there are no escape clauses or emergency clauses for a situation like this. And there needs to be a careful consideration now on European level, but also on national level, and possibly also on international level, on ICAO level, how right now and during a recovery process that these infrastructural charges will be covered and paid for. Because we need this infrastructure not only now during the crisis, we need air traffic control, we need the airports to be open because we have a lot of flights that have to fly also today. Anything from societal flights, let's say, medical, and police and firefighting, or you name it. There are a number of various flights that still take place. But we also need this infrastructure to be in place and unaffected so when we kick the traffic up again. If we are not managing to do that, we will have a very serious problem where we might see damage to the infrastructure in terms of we are not able to run it anymore. And there are huge costs that are just today, as we speak, ticking money because the systems, for example, for air traffic control and the air traffic controllers that are sitting there, diverting then a smaller number of traffic, but they are still needed there. And they have to get their costs paid. And right now, there's not enough flying in the air to cater for their costs. So already now there is a big dilemma, and this will continue to grow as long as the crisis continues. And the same equation is equal for then, let's say, the landing charges for airports and also security charges. So you could generally say that all these systems depend on certain volumes of passengers flying, buying their tickets and airplanes in the air. Now, when everything is grounded, of course, there are huge problems. So this is a very clear message. We are sending it to our government and to the CAA. We are in discussions with them, and we count on them to also approach the European legislator, the Commission, to take care of this problem. It's a very, very valid question. How the infrastructure will change? Well, to some extent, of course, it might have to be downscaled, but many of these operations cannot be downscaled too much because you have also safety requirements. So, as well as for the operators of airports and for airlines or for a security company or whatever, they need to maintain a certain level of expertise and staffing to be able to continue with their safety approvals. Now, if they cannot do that, they might lose their safety approvals. They might not be able to live up to the safety rules. And then they drop out of the system. It may take longer even to get back on track again. So there are many of these infrastructural changes that depends on European legislation that we have to look into now.
This is something that worries us too. We have been participating in several discussions at European level and even different coordinations for current and future ICAO meetings. One of the meetings that we're trying to coordinate is the high-level safety conference that ICAO is expected to still organize in 2021. However, none of these discussions touches the infrastructure issue. And we kept pinpointing to that, saying that we do need to tackle on the infrastructure issues as well. We cannot just talk about recovery plans and leaving all those discussions aside because it's a package. If we don't look at the aviation as an ecosystem and you take it fragmented, then you end up in the same situation. It's a vicious circle. You will not be able to properly recover. And also it is important to think of these elements as most probably we're facing some sort of economic crisis or at least economic challenges on all levels of the industry, and not only in the aviation industry.
No, and I can also say that other parts of our important infrastructure, transport infrastructure, when it comes to railroads and roads and shipping, many of them have the same problem, especially when you have these international legal frameworks and EU legal frameworks. So we are not the only ones experiencing this problem, but we have always been proud, I think, to be able to say that aviation pays for its own infrastructure to a very large extent. Now, this very good argument becomes a very tough one in this situation where we don't have the volumes in the system any longer. And it will take some time also in the recovery process to get to the level where we were. So this period of time somehow needs to be looked at from our legislators.
I was also a little bit surprised, I would not say disappointed, but surprised that one of the issues presented at European level as a measure, an important step in recovery, is to continue the implementation of the single European sky and the CESAR deployment. But this is worrying us because we do not take into account the same situation as when the single European sky has started. We have tried to draw the attention to the fact that today we see a drop in flying that reaches about 90%. I don't think that this has ever happened in the recent history of the aviation industry. So maybe the implementation of the single European sky and CESAR deployment are not our top priorities, but rather rethinking, reinventing certain elements and readjusting. And as you said, looking at the regulations from a different perspective these days, because nobody has taken into account a potential pandemic that would put the aviation industry on hold. I don't think anyone was expecting this.
I think we should be prepared to discuss the old systems, because we are in this situation. And of course, we are all hoping for a recovery, that when we are through that period, we will be up to good levels again, where we need to continue to discuss how to make aviation more efficient. And I'm a strong believer in the single European aviation sky, and I'm still a strong believer in our work on sustainability. All these things are important and they are connected. We need a more efficient and more sustainable aviation system, that's without a doubt. And what we need to do now is to review maybe some of these, let's say, structures that we have worked on before, to see, do we need to do something to make sure that we can continue to, maybe some initiatives should be paused for a year or two until, and then make a review again. Is it the appropriate time to continue? Because what we have to understand is that all of these things that you mentioned, and I mentioned also sustainability and efficiency, it's something that costs money. I mean, these things depend on an industry which is healthy, competitive, and making profit so that we can pay for all these good things. Now, over a period of time, this might not be the case. To be able to ensure that these niceties that we want to have in this system and the necessities that we need to have in the system are not then burdening the system with higher fees and costs to the industry. We need to have that review. I hope that our leaders, our political leaders, both nationally and regionally, are well advised to look at this. But I also know that the political context, certainly when it comes to aviation, is not always the most, let's say, in a way where you can raise that discussion, because anything that looks like mitigating the, let's say, a cost to the aviation industry might also look like letting the aviation industry get away cheaper. But we have to make sure that that's not the point. The point is to be able to make these good investments, for example, in greener technology. We need to have a system which can pay for it. And here, of course, over a period of time, we will have an industry which is in a weaker position. So to become a more, let's be frank, to become a more sustainable industry, which we all want, we need to be sure that we have the finances to pay for it. In combination, we can of course see that in Europe, the European Green Deal and the recovery process, which everyone now I think is saying it should be in a greener direction than before, is also shipping in money and resources to help us to realize our plans for biofuel, for example, for electrification, for straightening out the air routes in the single European sky. All these things can still be made, but we have to look at the financing of it.
Do you think that it's time for the aviation, I would not necessarily say industry, because I'm thinking about regional, international organization, so the entire aviation scene, is it time to rethink how we work? Is it time to rethink cooperation? Is it time to reinvent ourselves?
Well, I think in some ways aviation has always necessarily had to reinvent itself. We have to find solutions to our problems, and our problems are usually international. So we have to look at not only national level or regional level, but international level. Earlier today, we had a discussion about how we should use this crisis in Sweden to come up with new ideas when it comes to, let's say, having more efficiency in the transport system, the aviation, but also the other transport modes. So I don't think we should, we would be ill-advised to not use this crisis to get good things out of it. And what these things could be to have more efficient international regulatory system, for example. It could also be that these processes to regionalize regulation of aviation safety could be pursued, because it's quite costly to have a fully, let's say, a full system under the ICAO system in every country. Let's work on these regional bubbles instead. And as you said before, when we come to this Corona situation, if South America, I think you mentioned, is looking into creating their own, let's say, harmonized rules for how to travel safely from Corona in these times, I see a huge potential that they start then connecting directly to the other regional bubble here in Europe. And then we have the, let's say, the bubble to bubble, or actually the regional system to regional system. And once you have done that for aviation, let's say, health, then you can do it for other measures as well. That will make our system more efficient. And if then this also could be fully blessed in the international ICAO system, I think we have a lot to gain there in terms of efficiency, in terms of making things better. So this could probably be applied throughout the let's say, the aviation industry when it comes to type certificates or approvals of certain equipment or operations. Let's see how we can make that more efficient. I don't think we will see a fundamental change of the system, simply because it's very hard to recreate something where you have to have all the states involved. But I think in this way we could gain more efficiency by looking into cooperation between states and regions of states in a new way.
Do you think that through the last months and for the months to come, that we see more political decisions or more expert-based decisions, to say so? And which of them do you think should be prioritized? Do you think that we should approach the situation on more a political level, or it is time to listen more carefully to our experts?
Well, you're talking to, I don't know, the wrong guy or the right guy. I have my view here, of course, and I started with that also. I hope, and I'm convinced that we need to base this next, let's say, phase of aviation strictly on or as much as possible on factual, scientific, evidence-based measures. Because if we let too much of politics get into the international aviation relations game or scenario, we will, I think, damage aviation. There will always be political considerations, certainly when it comes to traffic rights and economical rights. But this is not an economical right. It's a human right, in a sense, to just as much as aviation safety could be a right to be able to travel safely. And this is something that the international community has to take care of using scientific methods and evidence-based methods. And again, I think that aviation maybe is sometimes misunderstood, because many people also here in Sweden would say that, well, the international system aviation system is slow, and it's too reactive. It's not proactive, and it's very cumbersome. But on the other hand, we are used to working internationally. We are extremely used to tackle problems together. And once we have a solution, it's globally accepted because it's best through the ICAO level and then filtered down to the national level, maybe sometimes through a region like in the EU, but then certainly down to the national level. So I usually say that if we do this in the right way, we might even show the way to other segments of the society how to handle these issues. And that's why it's so important now to tackle these, let's say the health or aviation biosecurity or whatever we should call it, in this same way as we have done before. But of course, we should tweak it and make it better wherever we can.
I really like what you said, because I do have a theory that society works by imitation to a percentage. So it's very important how we position ourselves these days in the aviation industry, because we could serve as inspiration and others could serve as inspiration to us. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. If you were to look in your crystal ball or cards, or if you could predict the future, how do you see the aviation industry looking by the end of 2021, let's say?
Still recovering. And I think most aviation analysts and also our leaders when it comes to IATA, ACI and others, they see that the crisis is deeper than we had expected. And it will take quite a long time to recover. I think we will see a push to these, let's say, bubbles of safe travel. I think we will see a quicker rise on the domestic and regional level than on the international level. There will be a lot of checks and double checks while the system finds a balance, just like after 9/11. I think there will be a lot of attempts to politicize this matter, but I'm confident that our leaders will avoid doing that also when it comes to, certainly in the decision making, but there will be attempts to politicize. I think that we will be able to travel much more already within a few months than we have done before. But again, it will start in segments and not just over a day. It's free to travel anywhere. And I think by the end of 2021, our normal destinations will be open again, but with reduced capacity because the financial situation of the system is not so good. And it may also be that we have to, let's say, tackle these infrastructural issues, which will be a tough discussion over this time, up till 2021, certainly. So there will be a lot of hard work there from the aviation, let's say, governance side. And ultimately, I'm sure that within the period that you mentioned, 2021, we will meet again in Bucharest.
Oh, I do hope so. I do hope that you can predict the future. I would very much like to greet you again here in Bucharest, just for a coffee, or even to create a beautiful event together. Thank you very much for being with us today. Your optimism and your confidence in the industry and in the right decisions, either political or expert-based, lifted my spirit a little bit. And I do hope that our viewers regain their confidence in the aviation industry and see that people are definitely making efforts for them to be able to travel again, either for leisure, for business, or just to see their families. That would be amazing.
And one last message maybe to the viewers. So of course, I hope to meet you all in person, whoever is listening to this or looking at this. But on a more general point, try to stay with the facts, try to stay with the scientific side of things. In aviation, we have always done that, and we will continue to do that. And that's the safest way out of this situation.
Thank you so much. That's a powerful message, and I do hope that it reaches many people. Thank you so much for accepting the interview with me today, and I do hope to see you very, very soon in person, not only via Zoom.
Pleasure to be on this channel with you, Sorana, and God bless and stay safe.
Stay safe too.